Are you recording?
You already have the demo.
Hello guys, welcome to today's lesson on the middle income trap. It was made by me, Theo, and Lucas. Lucas is out of Texas, so he can't be talking.
So what is the middle income trap? The middle income trap is where a country's income levels per person stuck around this $13,000 to $14,000 range. And this happens when a country hasn't developed or hasn't been able to innovate past industrialization to compete with high income countries. And this is because they typically fail to fund education, or there's big informal industry, and that they're too industrial reliant. And they can't get enough tertiary jobs. And this is a very interesting vocab word, which is a service sector job, right? So this is a job like a doctor, and working in finance and tech, teaching even, being a professor. And these middle income countries can't really break into these industries.
How it happens. So it usually happens because countries are able to quickly industrialize using cheap labor to break out of the low income level. Then the economy fails to transition to high income productive sectors. So this basically means they have like the cheap labor to do manufacturing, but they can't break into like more important sectors and make more money. This is usually due to innovation and not having ideas or being exposed to ideas that they can use to make this more high-level skills. This is also a result of the government not doing the right thing or setting up the country. To move from different economy levels takes a long time, so the government needs to have a good, strong plan. And if they experience change or there's a lot of change of government, they can't rely on a stable plan because it changes so much.
Right, exactly. And me and Mattia will talk about Taiwan. He'll talk about Korea, which had a very similar to Taiwan. And I'll talk about India and how you have to use careful policy. And it's really about the government doing the right things. The boring policy, not big flashy things the governments often tend to do when in these middle positions.
Yeah, and it takes a long time. In the last 34 years, only 34 countries have made it from middle income to high income.
And of course it is a little arbitrary, the metrics they use, but generally, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, right.
Oh yeah, So here we see a couple of different countries: Korea, Brazil, Philippines, and the Syrian Arab Republic. Most of these countries, below 1,000, most of them are in low income. Some of them are still stuck at low income.
And this graph is a bit outdated.
It is a bit outdated, yes. This is in 2006. But as you can see, Korea rapidly increased, going from low, middle, and then above. Well, this isn't above, but I'm assuming that it eventually breaks past 13,000 to make it into high income. We're going to be talking about Korea specifically later. Most of these other countries, they had a little bit of growth, but then they stagnated towards the end. Yeah.
And this is what I mean by it's arbitrary, right? Some people may argue that Brazil has broken out of the trap relatively, but they still have a lot of the same structural problems as other middle income countries, which is why they are considered middle income. And then this is just another graph to really cement in your brain that this is for countries, the contribution from natural resources usually gets them to this income level, it's a bit cut off. And then the contribution from labor, so having a big population. And then from knowledge, and these are like 3 I's, which we were talking about.
Yeah.
Which is industrialization, building factories, knowledge from other countries. And then to really break into high income, you need innovations, right? And we have a lot of that here in America, Silicon Valley, even Wall Street arguably, and a lot of more developed countries around the world. And this is something that middle income countries can't do very well.
So yeah, as Theo said, I'm going to walk you through the 3 I's. So usually when a country is in low income, all they can focus on is investments. So this is building a foundation and inputs. A country needs to industrialize and grow. This is basically, if a country doesn't have a basic manufacturing plant or an industrial base, it can't grow any more than that because they need to have this solid base. So to prepare a country for this, for rapid growth, they need to invest in a couple of things. These things can be physical infrastructure, human capital, and an industrial base. Physical infrastructure can mean roads, internet, trains, any service making movement easier and building up a country. Human capital is more related to education, healthcare, worker benefits. So incentivizing their workers to be not only more productive but want to work, which increases productivity, which is what they're trying to get to break into middle income and efficiency. Lastly, they need to start investing in factories, machinery, and other robots. This is important because if they're not innovating, they need other countries to use them to build products. And like, for example, semiconductors or electronics. This is because they want to get infused, which I'll talk about later, but getting ideas and working for other countries so they're exposed to this high level of technology, which later they can build off to expand their economy.
Yeah. And adding on what Mattia said, another reason that companies do these things is because businesses can't grow if they don't have access to roads and human capital and educated workers. And it also connects to brain drain and a bunch of other things we've already presented on. And if you could make that connection, good for you, but we won't talk about it much here. Anyway, the companies need these things to scale, which is something that middle-income countries often struggle to build up, and that's why companies can't scale and be innovative.
So now, after they built this base, they start to flatline. They are not inventing anything new, and they're basically just building factories and trying to increase productivity and efficiency as much as possible. What they can do, which will usually help break them out or stay steady in the middle income, is infusion. So this is bringing foreign technology, knowledge, and management skills into a country. Now this can be seen in a multitude of ways, but one of the big ones is licensing. So later we'll talk about, but Japan makes Samsung electronics. They don't make everything in Japan in the factories. They're going to give the license to a country like Korea or another country in the area where it has cheaper labor to build these parts, optimize them, and then give them back to Japan.
Yeah, I think Samsung's in Korea.
It is, that's what he said.
Yeah. It's in Japan.
No, I said as an example, like parts.
They got all the knowledge to innovate.
Well, that's innovation. So building stuff. Well, Samsung was created because originally they were working with licenses from Japan for other technology and then built off that. It can also be from foreign direct investments. This is other companies opening factories in that specific country. This leads the workers of that country to gain skills and learn skills and see how more high-level economies run a factory, as well as it's just a lot of knowledge that they're exposed to, which later they can build.
Right, and like I said too, this is very similar to investment. They happen at the same time because, like for example, Samsung really wouldn't have been able to innovate if they didn't have that human capital and educated workers in their country to build education. So in order to have innovation, right, to create new technologies, product versus all these tertiary jobs, really, you need a strong education system that can teach engineering, technical knowledge, creativity, the humanities. Everything's important to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem. This is another important vocab word, and this allows for global competition. With in Europe, you'll see this in North America, but you don't see a lot of this in Africa or Central Asia or even South America, and that's because institutions and governments, right? You need to have, and this won the Nobel Prize in economics, I think, some years ago. You need to have strong institutions in order to have a strong economy, and that's something that's really important with intellectual property, anti-corruption, the idea of rule of law in a country, because otherwise it doesn't encourage people to stay in your country, and that can lead to brain drain, and it doesn't encourage foreign investment in your country, and that's something you really need to break out of the product.
Building a little bit off what Theo said, this is very important. If a government makes a plan for an economy, the economy is going to change and to tweak their plan. If the government isn't stable, there's a lot of corruption, the money is going to start going towards biased things rather than things that will really push the country forward. And this thing about creativity and chasing one's passions, the government can't predict who's going to do what. But if they allow, if there's a culture in education where people don't just all do the same, they all want a factory job, but they maybe stray off the path or invent stuff new, this leads a lot to innovation, and then paired with an entrepreneurial ecosystem, it can lead to new companies being made, research happening, which really can boost a country and put it on a more global
something.
Global mainframe, yeah.
And that's really an important note which he made, that some countries can't predict what people go into. And you'll see countries like China which have the 3 eyes down, but they have a big problem with corruption still. And the foreign investment isn't very large in China. Well, it is, but not as large as it has to be to really compete with the United States. And people don't feel safe in China, right? People don't want to immigrate there. You have to, I mean, in the US you have to put a gun at someone's head to get them out of the US. In China, you have to put a gun to their head to get them in. And that's a real big problem that doesn't encourage foreign investment.
Many of the actual entrepreneurs from China are scared they're going to get copied, they're scared the government's going to control them, like Jack Ma is an example.
And also, like Tesla was really afraid to open a plant in China because of this.
Okay, so now we can look at a country that's successfully broken out. We're going to be talking about Korea. So this is a graph from 1960 all the way to modern day. And you can see that relatively around the 1990s, 2000s, they broke out. They successfully broke out, and they didn't flatline, they're continuing to rise. And this is GDP per capita.
Which is a little different income per capita, but
Yeah.
same idea. So some notable examples of countries that have broken out include Korea, which is not on the graph, but it's on here. South Korea is middle income, high income. These are countries that have stayed rich. Taiwan, Israel, Greece, these are all countries that have broken out of the trap. They're generally here. Then, like I said, it's a bit arbitrary, like where you put this line really does change things. And then there are countries that are getting there, like Argentina. And this graph is really good for visualizing how the middle income trap affects countries. And it is possible to go down too, right? Like North Korea or Niger is some examples of countries that were in the middle income trap that have become poor and not becoming poor. And this,
Yeah, just one interesting thing I noticed is Greece, which is a country that's now has a lot of corruption in the government, and it's not like they probably don't have a strong economical plan. Due to the fact that they did in the past break past the high income, now they can stay relatively in the high income. It's hard to drop levels unless due to like other factors that we're not going to talk about.
and there's where the low income trap is even more complex, and we won't talk about today, but maybe if you guys are
Doesn't Greece also have like an autonomy that like
It does.
is kind of holding it back?
it's a very interesting story with Greece. They had a lot of debt, and they still do. They have more debt even, but the way bond vigilantes measure debt is using debt to GDP. And because Greece was in the lower end of middle income, their strategy was to grow their GDP so quickly that it would outpace growing their debt. And now they have a much lower GDP to debt ratio, despite having even more debt. And just generally investors see it as less of a problem in Greece. So it's, you could say it's holding it back, but that's a problem with every country.
Okay, so South Korea. So what the South Korean government did at the beginning is they started by heavily investing in a base of an economy, and they chose manufacturing, specifically manufacturing of electrical parts. They did this, and they did it so well, it was so cheap, that other countries started getting were attracted to how low the costs were. So a lot of big companies, a lot of big Asian companies, electronics and tech, put a lot of their manufacturing gave them a lot of licensing so Korea could make these parts. What the Koreans did is so this is in fusion, if you remember. All this technology and skills, the workers started learning it, and started improving them, and they were making them eventually they started making them at a higher level than most of these other Asian counterparts. So the other Asian companies started getting a little scared, so they increased the price of the licenses, and the Koreans, instead of keeping the license, decided to innovate. They made companies in a lot of sectors, such as semiconductors, Samsung Electronics, as Vish said, and also automobiles, Hyundai and Kia, using a lot of the technology that they learned, but also because they had a good base in education, just innovating.
So another case study, India, which is an example of countries stuck in the trap, right? One big reason for this is that despite the population which seemed to break out, the government hasn't really done a lot of foreign political things, right? Like urban governance and education. and they haven't incorporated the informal sector that can't scale very well into a more formal sector that could get subsidies from the government to help it grow. And there are a lot of health issues in public, and these are some examples of flashy things the government is doing to try and look like they're trying to solve the trap. Like they're building the tallest statue in the world, and they're building a bullet train. But this is all instead of just getting better education and investing in small towns and villages that need these cash subsidies to grow. And for countries like this, it is really hard to break out of the trap because you don't want to be the boring politician that says, okay, I'm going to focus on urban governance. Instead, you do things like this that look cool but don't really solve the whole problem. And this is very similar to a lot of countries like Brazil and Malaysia that are all stuck in the trap as well.
Thank you guys for listening.
Are there any questions before we close?
Does anyone have any questions?
No questions.
Thank you.